On the fateful night of September 7, 1996, Tupac Shakur and Marion Suge Knight were driving in a BMW 750 sedan on Flamingo Road in Las Vegas. Suddenly, a white Cadillac pulled up alongside them and opened fire with a .40 S&W Glock 22. In an attempt to escape the gunfire, Tupac tried to climb into the back seat but was hit 4 times, twice in the chest, once in the thigh, and once in the arm. While Knight was only grazed by bullet fragments, Tupac was seriously injured. Despite Knight's quick thinking to drive towards Las Vegas Boulevard and Harmon Avenue, where they were pulled over by a bike patrol who then contacted paramedics, Tupac's injuries were too severe. During the ambulance ride to University Medical Center, he uttered his last words, "I'm dying." Tupac's girlfriend, Kidada Jones, tried to comfort him by expressing her love, to which he reportedly nodded in agreement, but tragically, he would not survive. The question remains, who was responsible for Tupac's death? This unsolved mystery has captivated the public's attention for years. Nonetheless, it is essential to examine the events of that night thoroughly. Following Mike Tyson's swift victory over Bruce Seldon at the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas, Tupac and Knight found themselves embroiled in another altercation. This time it was with Orlando Anderson, a member of the Southside Crips gang. One of Tupac's entourage, Trayvon Trey Lane, informed him that Anderson had stolen his death row chain and pendant from a Foot Locker store in Compton, where Lane was affiliated with the Mob Paris gang, a rival of the Southside Crips. Tupac confronted Anderson and punched him in the face, which escalated into a physical altercation involving both groups. Video footage from MGM Grand's surveillance system captured Tupac, Knight, and their entourage beating Anderson until hotel security intervened. The footage revealed around 6 people kicking Anderson while he was on the ground, which could have potentially enraged him to retaliate with deadly force. Tupac shared his concern with his girlfriend, warning her that something was not right and to stay behind. He claimed Anderson had started a fight with me for nothing and may have sensed the looming danger. Nonetheless, the events of that night ultimately led to Tupac's tragic death, leaving behind an unsolved mystery that still perplexes the public to this day. As Tupac and Knight drove towards Knight's Club 662 on Las Vegas Boulevard, they were pulled over by the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Bike Patrol just after 11 p.m. The police officers informed them that they were playing music too loudly and questioned the absence of a license plate. Tupac and Knight explained that the license plate was in the trunk, and the officers let them go. Minutes later, they stopped at a traffic light at the intersection of East Flamingo Road and Koval Lane, accompanied by their bodyguards in the car behind them and some women in a vehicle beside them. Tupac rolled down his window and invited the women to join them at the club, oblivious to what was happening elsewhere. Suddenly, a white Cadillac with California license plates pulled up beside them. Reports differ on whether the shooter fired from the window or got out of the car, but what is certain is that 13 shots were fired. Tupac, who had survived 5 gunshot wounds just 2 years prior, did not survive this attack. It is worth noting that Tupac believed that his rival rapper, Biggie Smalls, was involved in his previous shooting. Interestingly, some people speculate that Biggie, who was also fatally shot in a similar manner to Tupac, may have played a role in the Las Vegas hit. However, the details of this tragic incident and the possible motives behind it are still shrouded in mystery, with much speculation surrounding the identity of Tupac's killer. After the shooting, Knight drove off in a panic, leaving behind a chaotic and bloody scene. Chris Carroll, a police officer on the scene, described Knight as being in a state of shock, with blood pouring from his head. According to Carroll, Knight was running around, yelling, and seemingly in a state of disbelief. As Carroll approached the car, he saw Tupac's body fall out of the vehicle. The rapper was covered in blood, and his condition was dire. Carroll tried to get information from Tupac, hoping to find out who had shot him. He wanted to obtain a dying declaration that would help the police track down the shooter. However, Tupac was unresponsive and appeared to be fighting for his life. Then, in a sudden shift, Tupac's demeanor changed. He went from struggling to speak to appearing at peace. Carroll saw this transformation in Tupac's face and movements. For a brief moment, it seemed like Tupac might name the shooter. Carroll asked, "Who shot you?" Tupac took a breath, as if gathering strength to speak, and then replied with a defiant, "You." Despite Carroll's efforts, Tupac never regained consciousness, and he was rushed to the hospital. Another officer also tried to obtain a dying declaration from Tupac on the way to the hospital, but it was too late. Tupac's condition had deteriorated rapidly, and he was on the brink of death. In the hospital, Tupac's girlfriend recounted a poignant moment when he briefly regained consciousness while she played a song called Vincent by Don McLean. She observed his eyes move and heard him moan faintly, but he was unable to speak. When she asked him to move his legs if he could hear her, the sheets at the end of the bed moved, but it was short-lived, and he soon began convulsing, signaling the end was near. Just weeks earlier, Tupac had expressed a willingness to have children with his girlfriend, despite his earlier stance on not bringing kids into a corrupt world. On the night of the shooting, he even told her, "I'd take a bullet for you." When they were preparing to leave for Vegas, she asked if he wanted to take his bulletproof jacket, to which he replied, "No, it'll be too hot." If Tupac had been able to speak on his deathbed, perhaps he could have given a name. Had he not rebuffed the officer with a curt two-letter response, maybe he could have said something that would have led to an arrest. Sadly, that was not the case. Tupac's voice was silenced forever. Numerous theories have surfaced over the years about who might have been responsible for Tupac's death, and it's no secret that he had enemies. However, in those days, violent beefs were commonplace in the world of hip-hop, and just about every big name in the industry had their fair share of violent foes. One potential suspect in Tupac's murder was the man who had been beaten up in the lobby that night. Although Tupac claimed that he had just been attacked, the truth was that he had started the altercation. While it was rumored that Anderson, the man who had been beaten up, had bragged about the shooting, he vehemently denied having any involvement in it. He even stated in an interview with the Los Angeles Times that he was a big fan of Tupac's. However, it was later discovered that Anderson was a man of many faces. Yaki Gaddafi was present during the shooting and witnessed what had happened, but the police failed to follow up on his account. Unfortunately, Gaddafi was found dead in a stairwell just 3 months later, supposedly accidentally shot by Roddy Beal, a cousin of one of Tupac's group members, Outlaws. The rapper Napoleon, who was the cousin of the Outlaws member, later suggested in an interview that the accidental shooting had been due to the group's use of LSD. Despite this, many believe that Gaddafi was eliminated because of what he had witnessed. It's worth noting that the individuals involved in these tragedies were young and not yet fully developed adults. Tupac was just 25 when he was killed and had already survived being shot at age 23. Gaddafi, a witness to Tupac's shooting, was only 19 when he met his own untimely death. Similarly, Biggie Smalls was only 24 when he was killed. There is scientific evidence that the prefrontal cortex, which houses our ability to reason and make rational decisions, does not fully develop until age 25. This could have played a role in the violent events that occurred. Regarding Anderson, the man who allegedly started the fight with Tupac, he was tragically killed in 1998 at just 23 years old. Despite accusations that he was a gang member and responsible for Tupac's murder, Anderson's half-brother insists that he was a positive presence who never caused problems. While the Compton police claim he was involved in gang activity, those who knew him describe him as a cool and quiet person who wasn't prone to violence. According to a friend of Anderson, his childhood was not easy due to the absence of his father and the drug addiction of his mother, which was a common issue among his peers. Despite these challenges, Anderson had a supportive family and avoided drugs, smoking, and alcohol. He even pursued his education and had a clean criminal record. Nevertheless, he was unfortunately associated with the murder of Tupac, which contradicted his past behaviors and values. Anderson had once expressed his confidence in God and refused to dwell on the matter. The situation surrounding the murder of Tupac is convoluted, with police targeting Knight, the owner of Death Row Records, for potential imprisonment. Knight was seen more as a figurehead than a gang member and had corrupt cops on his payroll who were involved in massive cocaine theft and storage in death row offices. This corruption was part of the Rampart scandal, which may have influenced the investigation of gang-related homicides. In the midst of all this, there was a major scandal brewing. The Rampart Corruption Task Force uncovered evidence that many police officers were on the payroll of Death Row Records, working as security guards for the label while engaging in criminal activity. This was part of the larger Rampart scandal, which cast doubt on the integrity of police investigations into gang-related murders. One theory that emerged was that corrupt cop Rafael Perez was responsible for the murder of Biggie Smalls, hired by none other than Knight himself. Why? Because Knight believed that Biggie had been involved in Tupac's shooting. It's a complex story, and we acknowledge that it's important to explore all the twisted paths in order to understand the bigger picture. The non-corrupt cops wanted to bring Knight to justice, and they believed that the key to doing so lay in the CCTV footage from the MGM Grand Lobby fight. In his initial statement to the police, Anderson accused Knight of being one of the attackers in the MGM Grand Lobby. However, when he was called to testify in court, he changed his story and claimed that Knight was actually trying to stop the fight. The judge saw through Anderson's lie, but what he didn't know was that Knight had likely paid Anderson off. This wasn't the first time Knight had used money to manipulate the legal system. He had previously paid a large bail sum for Tupac's release from prison. Tupac then vowed to make Death Row the biggest label in the world. Despite Anderson's plans to start his own record label with the money he received from settling with Knight, he was tragically killed before he could make that a reality. 2 other young men also lost their lives that day. It's worth noting that Anderson's death came just days after he settled with Knight for the damages he suffered in the MGM Grand beating, with the settlement amounting to $78,000. Let us introduce you to Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, a former drug dealer and member of the Southside Compton Crips. He is also Orlando Anderson's uncle. Recently, Davis, who has cancer and is immune from prosecution, decided to reveal what he knows about Tupac's murder. He stated that he was in the Cadillac on the night of the shooting, along with his nephew Anderson. Although he didn't identify who fired the gun, he claimed that the shots came from the back seat. In interviews, he asserted that Anderson was the shooter. As the rounds continued flying, I ducked down so I wouldn't get hit, he recounted. According to Davis, Terrence T. Brown was driving the car with him in the passenger seat. Anderson and DeAndre Dre Smith were in the back seat. Unfortunately, Brown was fatally shot in a Compton medical marijuana shop in 2015, and Smith passed away in 2004 due to a heart attack. Both men were reputed to be gang members, making it impossible to corroborate Davis's account with them. According to Davis, the motive behind Tupac's murder was the beating that his nephew had received earlier, which only added fuel to the already fierce rivalry between the gangs. Davis also claimed that there was a $1 million bounty on Tupac's head, offered by Sean Puff Daddy Combs, whose record label, Bad Boy Records, had signed Biggie. James McDonald, a former security personnel for Knight and experienced in gang violence, confirmed that tensions had escalated between the Southside Crips and the Mob Peru Bloods after the chain incident in Compton. On the night of Tupac's murder, McDonald was stationed outside Club 662, where he spotted a Cadillac carrying Southside Crips. Immediately, he contacted his brother Anton, who had participated in the beating, and warned him of the situation, as the Southside Crips were present in Vegas and something was up. Unfortunately, Anton himself was later killed in gang violence. Looking at this case, it appears that the shooting was just another episode in the so-called thug life, where someone was shot over a chain and pendant. It was a world where violence was prevalent and respect for human life was absent. As writer Rob Marriott put it, the gangsta image was a tragic myth of empowerment that could rob a generation of its potential greatness. As for Mr. Knight, he is currently serving a lengthy prison sentence for voluntary manslaughter. Greg Kading, a former LAPD officer and investigator of the Biggie and Tupac murders, believes that Knight was responsible for Biggie's killing and that Anderson pulled the trigger that night. Kading also believes that Puff Daddy did offer the bounty. However, despite these beliefs, no one has ever been convicted of the 2 murders.